AM 1460, the new WXBR. You are listening to the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. Peter Czymbor Mike Paiva here with you on this Wednesday morning. Mike, we've had a lot of big guests on via the telephone for the most part in the duration of our program's existence, which is at 10 months now?
Yeah, huge guests.
We actually have a figuratively big guest in our studio right now in former NFL football player, current CFL football player, and former Brockton Boxer football player, my friend and yours, Jason Vega. Jason, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, guys. Nice to be here.
Jason, WXBR AM 1460, since I believe the 1940s, has been the flagship station for Brockton Boxers football. So it's so nice for you to come back here to this station in the capacity of being a professional athlete after all of your games for 4 years were broadcast on this very frequency when you were with the Brockton Boxers.
Well, I guess I wish I had known it was so close. Maybe I had to drop the buys a little bit more often, but it's actually nice to be in here and be able to participate.
This studio is actually brand new. Our old studios were at 60 Main Street in downtown Brockton, but you were the answer to several George's Cafe, Joe Angelo's, and Cape Cod Cafe Plays of the Game and Players of the Game trivia contests on Monday mornings, which we used to do back in the day. You remember that, Mike, right?
That's correct. A lot of people ate pizza because they said your name.
That's right.
That's really unfortunate because I would have loved to have joined them in eating this pizza.
Jason Vega's dad would have been calling in, "That's my son. Do I get free pizza?" And he would have gotten free pizza.
That's a very good possibility, actually.
Well, Jason, we've got a lot to catch up on. You played for Brockton High until 2005. You and I both graduated the same year. Mm-hmm. You went to Northeastern University, which unfortunately now no longer has a football team, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
What do you feel about that? Let me rephrase my question. When you get that letter in the mail asking for a donation, how do you feel about that?
Well, deep down, it brings back some good memories. I don't feel as though I'm obligated to give money, but I guess when I'm in a situation to be able to do so, and I feel as though it's going to a good cause, and I will. But it's really hard for me because guys that I've always played with along the last couple of years, they're like, "Oh, I'm going to my alumni game. I'm going to this game," and it's like, "Oh, well, I'm not going there for any reason at all, actually. I don't have a reason to go back to my school." So that part of things is tough, especially in the locker room when people ask you where you went to school, and they're like, "Oh, well, if you don't play football anymore at the school, how'd you get here?" Then you have to explain, and, I guess it creates an interesting story, but for the most part, it's a little bit difficult.
Why did their football program go away?
I think it's been in the making for a long, long time. If you, talk to people that were there over the last couple of years, or actually the last couple of decades, really, that they'd always talked about doing it. And I think finances was a big part of it. The direction of the school in terms of their focus on academics really kind of was a telltale for that. And then, we got a president that was really focused on academics and wanted to cut costs, and that was one of the ways.
It is interesting that in other parts of the country, college sports is like professional sports is here in the New England and Northeast area. But here in the Boston area, take it the season that Matt Ryan was with Boston College and a legitimate contender for the Heisman Trophy, it was an afterthought about 5 or 6 stories down with all the professional sports going on.
And it's really weird. I find that with all the success that the Patriots have had here and, all the good programs that we have in this state, that we would have a little bit more interest in football overall. But, it just pales in comparison to other parts of the country. I spent a lot of time in Florida training, and just seeing the amount of coverage that those kids get just at the high school level, whether you're talking about the freshman team or the varsity team, it pales in comparison here to what they get. So I don't know what it is about just the overall view on professional sports versus amateur sports. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely very different.
Once again, we're chatting with Jason Vega here on AM 1460, the new WXBR, currently a defensive end for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, if I'm not mistaken.
That would be correct.
So you had a cup of coffee, or more than a cup of coffee, in the Canadian Football League. I actually remember watching the Grey Cup. I believe NFL Network aired, and I'm like, oh, my God, that's Jason playing in the Grey Cup, sacking quarterbacks and things of that nature. How exactly did you make the jump from collegiate football to professional football without going directly to the NFL, because you ended up in the Canadian Football League?
I think it was a really, interesting period of time, because that last year that I had played, that's maybe a couple days before. So my last game, a couple days after, that's when they actually canceled the program. So shortly thereafter, the coaches had gotten out of town, basically. All the coaches had been trying to look for a new job. So come maybe the middle of January, I was pretty much there by myself. And a lot of what goes into preparation for getting into the NFL and pro days and all that other stuff usually goes through the school. And since there wasn't anyone there to actually vouch for me in a way, I had to kind of do it through my agent and people that I knew that way. So it was really interesting. I had my pro day at BC. I did it at Harvard. Did well, but I didn't receive any offers or anything like that. So I ended up taking my best opportunity, which was, the Canadian Football League, and seeing what happens.
Now, how long did you aspire to be a professional football player, and at what point did it become a realization that you legitimately could do this professionally? Because it is a small percentage of college players that can make the jump to the pros.
I've always been confident enough to believe that I was capable of playing at that level, especially when I see guys, on TV just like everyone else, and I watch film, and I'd say, well, I could do the same thing he's doing. And that's not to say that I feel like I can do what Tom Brady does. It's just, for every Tom Brady, there's 45 other guys that aren't nearly as talented as he is. So even though the percentages are small, if you find yourself to be a smart football player and capable athletically, I think you have a good chance of finding your way there in some capacity. You'll find an opportunity to play. So it's been good, interesting overall. It's been a great experience, though.
What was your first foray into the Canadian Football League, which, if I'm not mistaken, was your first foray into the paid ranks of football?
I was with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I went there the end of May, right after I graduated. And I had training camp there. I'd made the practice squad coming out of training camp. Then I got hurt. I had basically torn my groin, so I sat out that year, and that's the year I decided to go to Northeastern and get a job there as a student advisor for the athletes. So it was kind of a change of pace, and then I went back to being a professional athlete, I guess.
So you did have a real job for about a year and said, I'd like to go back to playing pro football.
Yeah, it was from September to April, and basically from September to about December, that's when I started to realize that I didn't want to work a 9 to 5 yet. I was really ready to go back to playing football. I felt like I was more than capable of doing so. So that's pretty much what I wanted to do.
Now, how did you end up with a team as a starter, and how did you end up in the Canadian Football League with a team that was doing quite well in the playoffs and ultimately playing in championship games? Tell us about that process from originally being with the Hamilton Tiger Cats.
Well, I got released from Hamilton, and I came home, like I said, to start working at Northeastern. And then my agent had been a guy who's really stuck by his guys in the way that he would always try to find them opportunities, no matter what, whether you told him that you didn't want to play anymore or whatever. So I want to say it was January of 2012. He had contacted me and said that the Packers were interested in working me out. So we were just kind of trying to figure things out for that. I started to get in shape and, going down to Florida a lot to start training and getting ready for that kind of stuff. They ended up participating in the Super Bowl that year, so that kind of delayed it. Then the Pro Bowl came up, and then that's when the lockout talk started to happen. So there was a lot of concern there that it finally did happen. So I was faced with more or less a decision of whether I wanted to wait until it ended and then go to camp with the Packers, or if I wanted to just go to the Canadian Football League and then try my hand up there. So I had to work out with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in Dallas, Texas, and it went well. I signed with them in April of that year and then showed up to camp.
Now, when you were with Hamilton, you said that you were a member of their practice squad. When you played with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, you ultimately were a starting member of their team. How did that happen?
It was really interesting because, maybe about a week in, I had probably one of the toughest, most vulgar coaches I've ever had in my life. And he was, literally from the first day that he met me, he was on me and on me and on me. And it felt like I was dead in my tracks. It was only a matter of time before I was out of there. So I thought I was going to be out of there maybe within a week or two of being there. And things worked out in a way where I competed for the open spot because there was a guy who had left, Philip Hunt, that went to the Philadelphia Eagles. So there was an open defensive end spot. And I competed with the other guys that they brought in, and fortunately enough, I won the job coming out of training camp.
Now, we'll talk about this more in a little bit when we get to your NFL playing days and later on here in the interview. But compare and contrast playing in the Canadian Football League to playing in the NFL, the level of play and the style of play, because there are some slight rule variations here and there.
Rule variations would be, or actually just the game overall, would be that the field's bigger in the CFL, whether it be wider, longer. The field goal posts are at the beginning of the end zone instead of the back of it, so that provides an extra defender for the defense sometimes, and sometimes it actually works out for us where the receiver will actually run into it. But you'll find plenty of those clips on YouTube or whatever. The play clock is a lot faster. Instead of, I think it's 40 seconds here, I'm pretty sure it's down to 20 or 25 up there. I can't even remember. I don't even look at the play clock. But it's things like that. We have 3 downs, not 4 downs, so you have a lot more special teams play, and the game plans overall vary greatly because you only have 2 downs to get the first down as opposed to 3, so you'll find a lot more passing going on. The receivers are in motion towards the line of scrimmage before the snap, which obviously provides a little bit of a different look for defensive backs. It doesn't necessarily matter to me too much because I have my hand on the ground just looking down, so for me, it was just things like that, and just the speed of the game I find is faster up there in terms of how up-tempo it is between plays. But the overall speed of the athletes on the field would be greater in the NFL, I found.
So do you think that some of the athletes in the CFL could be comparable to the NFL, or is by far and large the NFL a superior product in terms of the level of athlete you're competing against?
I think overall you'll find a lot better athletes in the NFL. I mean, basically the CFL is a trickle-down league for the guys that, for one reason or another, just didn't make it in the NFL, didn't get their shot, or looking to get back. Because, there's only so much space in the NFL rosters, and a lot of times what you deal with is trying to be in the right place at the right time, as far as the NFL. And sometimes you don't find that your first go-around for guys that are coming out of college. So you try to look for an opportunity to try to better yourself, and that's what I find a lot of guys that are in the CFL do, is they try to better themselves as players when they go up there. And some of them actually stay for whatever reason, one reason or another. And then others, do their 2 years and then go back to the NFL, try their hand, and then kind of bounce back and forth. There's
been some guys who have had unprecedented success in the CFL that have actually been able to maneuver into the NFL with some success as well. Doug Flutie comes to mind. Warren Moon, I believe, holds a whole bunch of records in the CFL, if I'm not mistaken. Who are some other guys who have done well in both leagues?
Cam Wake down in Miami. He did really well up in BC. For his 2 years up there, he racked up a bunch of sacks. Then he went to Miami, and he still continues to be a very good defender for them now. Let's see who else. Now you have a couple smaller names going down there. In Miami, there's also Thigpen. He's a punt returner, I think. He's doing well. Can't remember a bunch of guys off the top of my head. There's Armin Armstead that should have played this year, but unfortunately he had some health issues this year, so he didn't get to play, but that's another guy that I can think of. Jarrell Freeman from Indianapolis Colts, he plays linebacker for them. He's been down there for, I think, 2 years now, and he's actually done really well as a starter. I know this past year for sure. I want to say Browner also out of Seattle was in the CFL as well. So, I mean, you have a pretty good number of guys that have got some experience in the NFL and play well.
Now, following getting the starting gig with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in your season with them, when did it come about where you realized that you were a marquee player for this team, you were doing quite well, the fans were getting behind you, and that you were actually a major player in the CFL?
I don't know at what point that really came to be. It was all really new to me overall because we didn't get a whole lot of fan support at Northeastern. I mean, for what it is, like I said, the majority of those bigger schools like BC don't get a whole lot of fanfare, even though when they were doing really well. So for us, when we couldn't win more than 3 or 4 games a year, we didn't get much support in the way from the school or the community overall. So when I went up there, it was a huge difference where, I'm a relatively little-known guy. I go up there, and there are people already contacting me on Twitter like, welcome to Winnipeg and all this other stuff. So it was interesting for me in a way because I'd never seen fans support their team like that, and it was pretty much everyone from the beginning. As soon as you step into that territory, they try to treat you as one of their own, at least until you leave or whatever happens. So it was good for me, and just I started to have some success towards the middle and the end of the season. of my first year, where I really solidified myself as a starter after I had gone over some injuries early in the season. And things just kind of took off from there, and I guess my personality took over a little bit.
How popular is Canadian football in Canada? I mean, we obviously see the fanaticism that they have in relation to their hockey teams, particularly when they play the Boston Bruins. How popular is CFL football amongst Canadian sports fans?
It's really popular. I mean, some cities are bigger than others. Toronto's not so big on the CFL, as you can see. If you've seen any of their games, they don't really fill the stadium all that well. But you go to a place like Saskatoon, which
when
is
their mayor's
Saskatchewan.
there, they fill a substantial portion of it. But that's just because he's a large man.
Very true. Saskatchewan sells out their games every game, and it didn't matter whether they were, doing horribly 2 years ago or last year where they won the Grey Cup. They consistently come out and support their team. Winnipeg's another place that consistently does so as well. And they have a sense of pride with their game because they feel like, the CFL is their game in terms of how they've adapted it and the number of Canadians that play in the league and the product that they put on. So I feel like they have a lot of pride in that, and they support it really well, surprisingly.
Now, you played in a Grey Cup with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Was that in your first or second season with them?
My first season.
In your first season, describe the experience of playing in the Grey Cup and describe to us the feeling of playing in their version of a championship game as opposed to big championship games we see in various sports here in the United States.
It was interesting. It really was, because I'd never really dealt with that degree of success, at least since I had been in Brockton High, and it certainly isn't to that level where you're playing on national television and in front of millions of people. So it was just a lot of a blur, and I guess I was a bit overwhelmed at first in terms of our first playoff game was, I couldn't even describe to you how cold it was. It was so cold, and there was still not a seat in the entire stadium that you could find that was empty. Based on the amount of support that we had people standing outside of the stadium that were waiting for the game to end, and they were just standing there while the game was going on. And I can't remember specifically how cold it was, but I'd say Fahrenheit, it was about minus 14, 15, around that area.
And that's normal in Winnipeg, if I'm not mistaken, right?
At that time of the year. So it was the beginning of November. It was about right.
So basically, this week is going to be a breeze for you here in Brockton, Massachusetts, with it being in single digits.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm not even concerned. When I was in Winnipeg this past month, at the end of December, it was minus 51 Fahrenheit. So it was actually colder there than it is in the North Pole.
I don't think I've ever experienced cold quite like that in my life.
You don't want to, I assure you.
I don't want to. You're absolutely right. I'm not going to dispute that at all. We're joined by Jason Vega here on AM 1460, the new WXBR, current defensive end for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Ultimately, you found yourself in the NFL. How did you make the transition from the CFL to the NFL? Were a lot of NFL teams aware of what you had been doing in the Canadian Football League?
My agent did a really good job of making sure that I had as much exposure as I could. Coming out of the league for my second year, he had been sending out film and contacting teams whenever he could. So I had a lot of exposure in terms of all the NFL teams. They all knew I was coming out and wanting to try the NFL. So as soon as I had kind of made the decision that I wanted to in November of that year, of my second year, he had let everyone know that I wanted to work out, and we started to schedule some workouts shortly thereafter.
Well, we'll chat a little bit about your NFL experience after this. We're chatting with Jason Vega here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. We're going to break for a local news update. You don't mind sticking with us, do you?
No, sir.
That is Jason Vega joining us here on WXBR. We'll step aside for a quick news break courtesy of Mike Paiva. We'll be back with more after this. And we're back here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. You were listening to the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. Peter Czymbor and Mike Paiva here with you on this Wednesday morning. Remember to follow us on Twitter at PM in the AM Boston, like us on Facebook, PM in the AM, the Metro South Morning Show, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/PM in the AM Boston. Best place to hear archived interviews and segments from this particular program. This interview we're conducting right now with Jason Vega will be available a little later on today. Once again, we're chatting with Jason Vega, current defensive end for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers of the Canadian Football League, former Brockton Boxer football standout. Jason, in the first segment, we were talking a little bit about the point where you realized that you were getting a lot of fan support from fans of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and things of that nature. I can speak for me and Mike, and it's really not that big. When there's people that you don't know personally that know you because they wake up every morning and turn you on. It's kind of weird and creepy the first time. How did you deal with that?
I find myself to be a bit of a people person in the sense that I can pretty much talk to anyone and everyone. So it was easy for me. It was different for sure at first, but I just kind of dealt with it as it came. And especially with social media the way it is now, it's really big out there in terms of the fans wanting to know how you're doing, what you're doing every day. And I mean, I have people who will literally 365 days a year tweet at me, say good morning, hope you have a blessed day. And, you know, she'll do it no matter what. I cannot respond for 2 weeks and then respond one time, and then she'll just continue to do it every day. So it's great in the sense, you know, to feel that kind of support and feel like you're that important to people. So it gives you, I guess, a little bit more motivation to try to do as best as you can when you go out there and play for them.
This is going to be the most listened to show we've had in Canada, Mike, over the internet since we had that children's singer on from Canada. What's that guy's name again?
Rafi.
Rafi.
Yeah.
Yes, baby beluga guy.
We need more Canadian listeners.
We need more Canadian listeners. We had Rafi on the show, and all of a sudden we had all these Canadians following us on Twitter. We were like, what happened? I sensed that happening once again this morning as Jason Vega is joining us in studio.
Yeah.
Jason, you come back here to your hometown of Brockton, Massachusetts, and the fanfare you get in Winnipeg is fantastic. But to my knowledge, they don't have you painted on a mural in Winnipeg. Here in Brockton, there is a mural of Tom Brady, Armand Colombo, and you in your Brockton Boxers football uniform. Your thoughts when you first heard about it and your thoughts when you first saw it?
I actually thought it was a joke, to be honest. When I had heard, I can't remember who told me, but they'd said that, you know, they have a mural of you in Brockton, you should go see it. And I'm like, come on, are you kidding me? Like, there's no way they're going to put me on a wall in Brockton. And I'm
with
like,
Tom Brady, no less.
With Tom Brady, no less. And then they started to add in, like, who else was on the wall. I'm like, okay, you're a really good joke. And they're like, seriously, go look at it. So I actually drive up, and I'm like, I can't believe that's me. I said, why am I on the same wall as Tom Brady and Armin and Teddy Bruschi and whoever else is on the wall? So it was surreal at first, and, you know, I felt like I didn't really deserve it. Because you know, for me, I personally feel like there's never enough that I can do in terms of achieving what I want to do and success and all those kinds of things. So, I mean, it was a pleasant surprise, but I certainly didn't feel as though I deserved it.
For anyone listening right now, it is on the corner of Belmont Street and Main Street. As Belmont turns to Main Street, you will see Jason Vega painted on a mural with Tom Brady, Teddy Bruschi, and Armand Colombo.
You can't miss it.
You can't miss it. You're actually prominently featured on the mural. You're not just like in the corner. You're a main part of the piece.
I can only say that I'm honored to be on the same wall as some of those other guys.
Well, you would become a teammate for at least some time with a few of those guys, or at least one of those guys, Tom Brady, when you signed on with the New England Patriots. That must have been a dream come true, getting signed by your hometown NFL team after having a good season in the Canadian Football League. How exactly did that happen? How did you get involved in the New England Patriots?
Well, my agent had set up a workout with them. It was literally, I think, the day after I was allowed to start working out with NFL teams. They had scheduled a workout, and I was there, I want to say it was December 26th or the 27th at 6 o'clock in the morning to work out. So I had the workout, and pretty much later on that day, we had decided that I was going to play for them as opposed to taking any other workout. So I'd made a decision to play for them, and you know, everything kind of took care of itself in the sense where I showed up for OTAs and off-season workouts if, you know, that's not clear, and, you know, just started to do my thing with them.
For those of us who are not professional athletes, describe to us the process of a workout with an NFL football team.
It kind of ramps up in intensity as you go along, but it's pretty much you go there in the morning, you know, you get your breakfast, something to eat, your workout for an hour and a half or so. Then you go to the field, you work out with the staff there for another hour and a half, and then you can pretty much study film or catch up on the playbook. Anything that you need to do in terms of football is concerned, you can pretty much do it there.
Who's looking at you? Who's scouting you?
No one really scouts you once you're there, although they always remind you that you're always being evaluated every time you step in the building, which is, I guess, an interesting statement to make to, you know, grown adults. But you know, you're always in there with the strength staff there, which would be Harold Nash and his assistants. Coach Belichick will occasionally walk around the building and just kind of say hi to everyone, but he can't really do too much because of the rules that they have in place with off-season workouts and stuff. So, you're evaluated by the staff, and, I guess word of mouth kind of passes around throughout the building in terms of what you're doing.
Who did you have close relationships with in the New England Patriots organization and in the team during your tenure there?
I was really close to Harold Nash because he had actually played in the CFL. He had played for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers as well some time ago as a cornerback. So I kind of leaned on him for some information and guidance in terms of what I needed to do and things like that. And we really hit it off well in terms of, I guess, being able to relate in terms of our experiences throughout our career. So as a coach, he would probably be the most that I had fallen in place with. And then as players, I mean, pretty much anyone in that locker room, I guess, would be somebody I could consider to be close because it was such a tight-knit locker room and a great group of guys overall where, I could go up to Gerard Mayo and kind of talk to him and have a conversation with him, and he wouldn't even think anything of it in terms of, me being some kid that just came from Canada playing football and him being a Pro Bowler. He just didn't even think anything of it to have a conversation and just kind of relate.
Any hazing or anything? Was it generally good vibes in the locker room throughout?
No, I wouldn't call it hazing. I think it was just kind of more of a initiation thing. You'd have to stop the meeting and go up to the front of the room and tell a joke or a funny story or something like that. Nothing crazy. With the rookies or the new guys there, it was just more or less kind of knowing what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it.
When they made you stop and tell a joke in the front of the room, what was the joke you told and how did you perform? Because I can tell you right now, dating back to his high school days, Jason Vega could be a very entertaining character. Me and him stopped Mr. Burley's social studies class on more than a few occasions. It happened.
This is very true. Very, very true. That class had a number of, I guess, I don't want to call it interruptions, because interruptions would mean that they were negative. I'd say
no. He partaked in the interruptions and let us go with it. To his credit.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. It was more or less a play along in terms of how we would do things.
He's a really good guy, Mr. Burley. If you're listening out there, we remember you very fondly. But what did you do in these team meetings when they put you on the spot and asked you to do something entertaining as part of an initiation? I
honestly couldn't even tell you what kind of joke I'd put up there. I'm sure it was probably something that wasn't exactly safe for radio to be retold. But, it was just kind of that thing where they just tell you to go up and just tell your joke. My first joke wasn't well received. I know that because the veterans were really hard on us. You had Vince Wilfork and Tommy Kelly, and they were just, the harshest critics in the back of the room. So I know the first one didn't go over well, but I know the second one did. And I honestly couldn't even tell you what they were.
Who was the funniest guy in the locker room and most humorous guy on the team?
Oof. I'd probably say Chandler Jones. Yeah, he's probably the funniest guy in there. I mean, he's just always bubbly and laughing and joking around or doing something. So I would probably say him. And I think a close second would be Coach Belichick, of course. He's very bubbly and entertaining. You actually do hear whispers from time to time that he can be a really funny guy, but you never see that come out, particularly us as a member of the media. Give us an example of something Belichick might do that's funny. Well, his way of humor is very different, I guess, from normal people in a way. He would have a team meeting and just kind of pull up a press clipping of what some guy said, across the league or whatever it was, and then just kind of lay into him in terms of how he felt, what kind of player that guy was, and what business he had saying whatever it was. So if it was, I can't remember anything specific, but there was a guy who had said that he was going to be the defensive MVP, and Coach Belichick said, well, he didn't even play last year because he was hurt. How could you be aiming to be a defensive MVP? Maybe you should, worry about playing a whole season before you try to make yourself, the best player in the NFL. So it was those kinds of moments that he found to be his niche in terms of humor. And then occasionally, pop a joke on Tom or something like that. But other than that, he was really quiet. And especially when we got towards training camp and anything like that, it was strictly football, and that was it. We're chatting with Jason Vega here on AM 1460, the new WXBR, former member of the Brockton Boxers during their Super Bowl years of the mid-2000s. And over the past year,
spent some time playing in the NFL before he signed once again with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, where he's currently a defensive end. Let's talk about Patriots training camp. Your first NFL training camp had to have been quite the experience, because it certainly was no ordinary training camp for the New England Patriots at the beginning of this season. Originally, everyone thought it wasn't going to be a normal training camp because the media scrutiny would be big because Tim Tebow was a part of the team. That became an afterthought after their star tight end Aaron Hernandez was arrested on murder charges. First off, did you ever have any experiences with Aaron Hernandez while he was still a part of the organization? What do you think of him?
He and I did not have very many interactions, and from what I can tell you, from a personal point of view, we didn't exactly hit it off when we had our interactions. I didn't find him to be a very personable person in terms of wanting to get to know anyone. I know he had his dealings with his guys that he had always been around, so Gronk and Edelman and like those kinds of guys, but for he and I don't think we ever really had a moment where we shared anything of significance.
So he hung out basically with the wide receivers on the offensive side of the ball.
For what little he did, yeah.
I have to imagine that it was shockwaves throughout the organization when all of a sudden the news came out that Aaron Hernandez was being investigated in relation to a murder, then ultimately arrested, and then subsequently released from the team. What was the atmosphere like when all that went down?
It was really, it was talk amongst the players, but it wasn't anything that was spoken upon out in the open just because they really didn't want us talking about it, because we didn't know enough about what was going on, and there was a lot of investigating, obviously, at the time and reporting. So for us, it was, hopefully it's not true, but, we need to continue in preparation for the season and training camp and things like that. So, hopefully everything that you see on TV isn't true, but you start to believe a little bit more and more of it as you kind of find out more.
I remember they asked Tom Brady specifically about Aaron Hernandez, and he basically said, I can't talk. Stacey told me not to. Stacey being Stacey James, who is the Patriots media person that we deal with here in the media. What exactly did the Patriots PR team tell the players in relation to the numerous questions you were bound to get from the media with this nationwide huge story?
They just said, don't talk about it. Just point it to Stacey or, tell them to talk to the media relations, to talk to Coach Belichick, but don't say anything in direct relation of that situation about Aaron, his character, his dealings with the team, anything.
And you're the new guy, so you don't want to say anything because you're not on anyone's radar, and you probably don't want to be at that point in relation to that.
Yeah, I was trying to maintain the be seen, not heard mentality when I was there, so I definitely wasn't going to say anything about him, especially since I didn't really know him because he wasn't around a whole lot towards the beginning because he had just had, I guess, shoulder surgery or something like that. So he wasn't around too much at that point, and I didn't know him enough to actually have an opinion of him, so.
Was it difficult or easy for the team to sort of put that in the back of their head and move forward with the task at hand of preparing for the football season?
I think it was easy. Maybe not for the guys that were the closest to him, maybe Tom, because, obviously that creates a significant hole in the offense for him going into the season. But I think overall as a team, it was easy because it's such a business atmosphere there that Coach Belichick doesn't allow things like that, even something of that magnitude, to bother the team or hinder them in a way that would, I guess, create a problem for the season.
What was Tim Tebow like since he was there during the time you were there in the locker room?
He was great, honestly. As a person, he's pretty much as good as you'd come across. As an athlete, he was dedicated. He was there all the time. He was watching film. He was working out and working out and working out. And, he'd hang around the building a lot. So I found myself to be there for long periods of time just because I'm close to home and I really didn't have much else to do. But I'd see him in the morning when I came in at 6 o'clock, and then there are times I'd be there at 8 and he'd be just getting out of the shower or just leaving the weight room or something. He'd still be there for a little bit longer. So he was pretty much as dedicated I would have seen an athlete in all of my dealings. But I think he was overall a very, very good locker room guy.
Now, in your time with the New England Patriots, you did get the opportunity to play in some preseason games. Who was the guy that you would go to on the defensive side of the coin, maybe a veteran that kind of let you know how things were done? What was it like playing in the NFL for the very first time under the bright lights of Gillette Stadium and in games that were broadcast regionally and nationally?
The guys that I would turn to would be Rob Ninkovich. He was always very helpful. Tommy Kelly, he was actually really helpful as well, even though that was his first season there. Just overall, his knowledge of the game and his approach, I think, helped me a lot in terms of how I would kind of figure things out as the game went along. And he served as a bit of a mentor to me in my time there in terms of when I might have had some struggles and had some success at the same time. So I think those are some of the guys I would lean on. And in terms of just playing under the bright lights and all that, I really didn't get caught up into it all that much. And I almost had to be reminded that it was that big of a stage and that big of a situation. And, then you start getting into all the percentages and how many players actually get to play and that kind of stuff. I didn't get caught up into it at all. It was almost as if every day was a practice on the field or anything like that. Honestly, I really didn't see the big deal in being out there and being on national television or anything like that.
Any specific moment of playing in a preseason NFL football game that you'll actually remember for the rest of your life as being a moment of, well, I'm here, I'm in the NFL, I'm not over my head?
I would say my last preseason game with Dallas. I had actually a pretty good game defensively, and they had named me the player of the game for that game, defensive. So for me, it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, I guess maybe I can solidify myself a little bit here in the NFL and have a bit of a niche. And it's not to say that I never felt as though I didn't have what it took to be in the NFL. It was just more or less proving that I could. And once I had opportunity, then I would. So for me, I think that was a bit of a confirmation of what I felt was what my abilities were, and that's where it kind of took off from there.
We jumped a little bit from your time with the Patriots to the Dallas Cowboys, and I'll tell you that one of my favorite things to do in the summertime is I love watching HBO's Hard Knocks. And one of the most fascinating parts of that show, in my opinion, and I'll point to one specific scene that stands out, is when they have to cut players. And the one that stands out to me is when they had to cut Chad Johnson following some off-the-field issues he had with the Miami Dolphins. The moment where you get cut from the New England Patriots, describe the feeling. I mean, I know it's not pleasant, but what's the process like? Who comes and speaks to you? And do you just say to yourself, what's next?
Well, for me, it was 2 days after the first preseason game where we had played in Philadelphia. I just showed up in the morning, ready to practice or whatever and have our meetings in the morning. So I had treatment early that morning because I had sprained my MCL in the game. So I'd come in for treatment and all that other stuff. And once I was getting ready to go to the meeting, you get the tap on the shoulder. It's what we call in football world the Grim Reaper, which is the guy you never want to see, you never want to talk to. So he gives me the tap on the shoulder, and I was just kind of like, you know what, I knew it. Just because you never want to get hurt in the preseason because it obviously limits your opportunity to display what you're worth. And, but it was something that I was completely aware of as a possibility. So once I did get the tap, you go meet with the GM, which his name slips my mind right now. You sit down with him and you have your discussion about why and how and what happens next, and that's pretty much it.
Well, from there, you did find yourself as a member of the Dallas Cowboys. You'd get the opportunity to play with the Cowboys not only in the preseason, but also in the regular season. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Do you mind sticking around for another segment?
No, sir.
We will step aside for a quick break. Mike Paiva brings us a local news update. We're chatting with Jason Vega here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. AM 1460, the new WXBR. We're entering into the second hour of our program this morning. Peter Czymbor and Mike Paiva here with you on this Wednesday morning, PM in the AM, the Metro South Morning Show. We're chatting with Jason Vega in studio, current defensive end for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers of the Canadian Football League, Brockton native, former Brockton High School football player, who we were chatting about his time spent in the New England Patriots organization in the last half hour of the program. And you got cut from the New England Patriots, as we talked about, and ultimately found yourself with the Dallas Cowboys. How did you enter into the minds of the folks with the Dallas Cowboys that you could be a part of that team?
Again, I have to attribute it to my agent. He was always on the phones and trying to search for the new opportunity, the next opportunity for me. And I want to say it was the week after I had gotten hurt where I was just kind of doing my own rehab in the gym and at the field, where he'd called me and said, well, Dallas wants to bring you in. When can you be ready? And I said, well, I guess I can be ready today. There's not a whole lot of things that I can do to get a whole lot better in the next couple of days. So it was just kind of back and forth between me and him. And that was in the morning. And by that afternoon, I was on a flight to Dallas. So it all happened pretty quick.
Now, you got injured during your time with the New England Patriots. You were ready to go with the Cowboys, however?
Yeah.
Now, there was talk amongst people in local media during your time with the New England Patriots that at best you were probably going to be on the practice squad with the New England Patriots. With the Cowboys, you certainly did a lot more than just being on the practice squad. You got the opportunity to play in some regular season games. First off, the moment where you realized that you made the team, that you're a part of this organization, that you weren't going to get that tap from the Grim Reaper, as you mentioned.
It was gratifying. It was good because I felt like I'd worked so hard just in that year alone to try to get ready for it and mentally prepare for everything. So I felt like it was just I don't know, a swan song. I don't even know what to call it in a way, but it was just kind of like, okay, you made it, you're here right now, but now you have to stay in the room. And that's kind of basically what Coach Garrett would always say, is that it's hard to get into the room, but it's even harder to stay in the room. So keeping that in mind, it was more of a moment for me to realize, okay, I'm here, but now I want to stay here as long as I can and try to find my niche with the team. So that was more of what I was focused on.
Now, you were part of the Dallas Cowboys organization, partaking in practices and things of that nature, but ultimately you would get the call up to actually play and dress in some live regular season NFL games. What was the first game you played in, and what was your role in that particular game?
We played at the Philadelphia Eagles.
Was that a Sunday night game?
No, I think it was an afternoon game. We had played there. That was the first game that I was active for, and that was a game that DeMarcus Ware wasn't playing, so we just had a rotational thing going for the defensive ends, and it was more or less just trying to get in there whenever I could, whether it be every other series or whatever, and just try to make an impact.
How much playing time did you get in that game, and what did you learn from your experiences of playing in live NFL games that you can take with you now in the CFL?
I got about half the snaps of that game. I want to say it was about 30, and it was great in terms of seeing things as fast as possible and as fast as they actually get. I was playing against some really good football players, LaShawn McCoy and Nick Foles, who actually ended up being pretty good overall for the season, and Jason Peters, who had come back and made a Pro Bowl himself. I had spent the large majority of the afternoon going against him, so it was a learning experience for me, and when I combined that with the things that I had learned from the guys in the locker room throughout the year, there are a lot of things that I think I was already doing in terms of my dedication to the sport, but it's an understanding that you can never do enough to be prepared to continue to play football, and as you get older, that becomes even more important. So that's what I kind of took from it.
You hear time and time again about the Patriot way and them being the preeminent franchise in the National Football League, but in the 90s, it was the Dallas Cowboys. Compare and contrast the organizations of the New England Patriots and the Dallas Cowboys, the two teams that you have experiences with in the NFL.
They're complete opposites in terms of the locker rooms and the atmosphere. I mean, it was really laid back in Dallas. The players are there just kind of having a good time, and when we had to go out to play, we played, and it was a lax environment in terms of their interactions with the coaches and the administration that would come through, whereas when you felt you were in the locker room with the Patriots, it was almost you talk amongst yourselves, but it was very, very business-like. It was high stress, always kind of looking over your shoulder kind of a thing. So it was incredibly different in terms of how they maintain their locker rooms, and I don't know, that might be why they're so successful over there in terms of being able to continue to win games season in, season out. But, you look at a team like Seattle Seahawks, and they have as lax of a locker room as I think anyone in the NFL or any team that plays football, and they happen to be doing pretty well.
So it's not a matter of what is good and what is bad. It's a matter of what works for each individual team, basically.
Yeah, it's just whatever works for that character of the team, and as long as they go out and play football, there's nothing to complain about.
We're chatting with Jason Vega here on AM 1460, the new WXBR, current defensive end for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the Canadian Football League, who spent some time in the NFL over the past year. We should ask you this question because me and Mike are very into things like this. I have to say, Jason Vega, I believe, is the only person that I went to high school with that has a verified Twitter account, which I find to be quite impressive.
That's pretty awesome.
Because Mike and myself aspire to get that little blue check one of these days. What's the process of that? You're in an NFL team and they just run down the rules, don't say anything stupid on Twitter?
They really don't say a whole lot in terms of what the rules are for social media or really your interactions with the media at all.
Really?
The majority of training that I got was with the CFL, and I guess that's pretty surprising where you sat down and they brought in a guy from the head CFL office and he went over a whole 45-minute presentation about how you speak to the media, how you present yourself on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and all that other stuff, good examples, bad examples, and just an idea of how you want to interact with people, as opposed to the NFL where they didn't really say much in terms of how you should carry yourself. Just don't be a bad example.
One of my favorite Bill Belichick moments ever, and I can't think of the player who told some joke that a stand-up comedian had told about he's homophobic, like he's arachnophobic. He's not afraid of a spider, but if he saw one in the shower, he's going to scream. And the media asked Bill Belichick about it. And the look on Bill Belichick's face was, this is why the mainstream media is in my office today. Like, every impulse that one of these players gets, they're going to start typing now. So that's why I was wondering. I thought there might have been some, don't say this, don't say that, be careful what you say, things of that nature.
With Bill, I mean, I think it was more team specific, and the Cowboys really didn't have anything to say or to offer in terms of the players of what they should and shouldn't do. With the Patriots, it was pretty much laid out by Coach Belichick to be very businesslike. He wanted the first-year guys to shut their Twitter off and shut off all that. I can't remember what he used to say. He didn't actually know what they were called, so he kind of...
He's in his own little world.
Yeah, he just kind of put them all together. He's like Instabook and Facegram and all this stuff. So, we got a good laugh out of that, but he was very serious about wanting guys to reduce the amount of distractions that they had off the field, so they wanted to make sure that we weren't on those things.
How different of a guy is Bill Belichick in private as opposed to the guy that we see at press conferences and doing interviews?
In season, not much different. But I also should point out that he's not a very big fan of the media, as you probably very well know. He doesn't enjoy answering questions about things that probably already have answers and things like that. So how he is with the players, I think he's very different. He's a little bit more lax. Like I said, it depends on the time of the year. If it's during the season, he's usually pretty strict about football, but he'll joke around with guys that he knows, and he's been around for a while. So I would say his interactions are quite different from the ones that you see in press conferences.
Well, let's talk about your time with the Dallas Cowboys a little bit further. You played in 2 regular season games. Second regular season game as opposed to the first. Describe your feeling going in. You've been there before.
It was just kind of a new thing. You approach every week as a new opportunity, a new challenge, and that's exactly what it was. You went from playing in Philadelphia, and then we go to Detroit to play against those guys, and they're 2 very talented teams, and they provide different types of challenges respectively. So I just went into it wanting to improve on the things that I did wrong in the game before. I say that, and I had actually had 2 consecutive offside penalties in that Philadelphia game, so that was a rough start for me, and I had to realize that, it couldn't get much worse than that. So I went into the second game trying to improve on those kinds of things.
Did they have your jersey for sale in the pro shop, or were you not there long enough?
I don't know. I didn't even go to the pro shop. They don't have one right where we're at because down there they actually practice in Valley Ranch and they play in the stadium. So the only time we actually ever go to the stadium is so that we could play in a game. Otherwise, we're never there.
That's an enormous facility they've got in Dallas, Texas now.
Yeah.
That stadium's been used for NBA All-Star games, Manny Pacquiao fights, all sorts of stuff. It's just gargantuan with a huge video screen. How impressive is that in person?
It's actually quite impressive. I'd seen in Vancouver they have, I guess, what they claim is the second biggest screen, and that was quite impressive when I played there for the Grey Cup. But then when I saw this one in Dallas, I couldn't even believe it, where I found myself just looking at the screen instead of the field, even though I'm field level, so I can pretty much see everything I need to see. But I was just sitting on the bench and just kind of looking up and kind of admiring the game from there.
Well, now you're a member of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers once again as a defensive end. You've re-signed with that team. How did you go back to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and what was your departure like from the Dallas Cowboys?
The departure wasn't really a surprise, just because when you're on the practice roster, your stay there is determined by how you practice, and then whatever happens to the team. So if you have a bunch of guys that get hurt, then they need to shift the roster around and move guys around, bring them in, bring them out. And at that time, we had lost, I couldn't even tell you how many starters at that point. So I kind of got the feeling that it might be the case, and it was heading down the stretch of the season. So for me, the departure was, I guess, expected in a way, especially with some of the health issues that we were having on defense and some of the guys that we had coming back on at the defensive line spot. So for me, it was just kind of taking things in stride and seeing it as an opportunity to possibly go somewhere else, maybe go back there, but. After I was released, I just kind of took it day by day and just kind of enjoyed myself a little bit, spent some time in Canada, seeing some of my friends up there and my girlfriend up there. So then I kind of got to the end of the year, and I decided that I wanted to get a little bit of stability for the next couple of years, and contacted the team and kind of worked things out.
Was there any thought in your mind that you wanted to try another NFL team out, or did you say, I want to go back to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, I want to go back to the Canadian Football League, I can make my mark here?
I had always felt like that was something I could do, is make my mark in the CFL and with that team, with that community, and just kind of find my niche with them, because I felt like I'd really found myself to be in a really good spot before I'd left, and I felt like I could continue to do so as I spent more time there. So that was part of it, and I did it knowing that I had other opportunities in the NFL on the table, and even though my agent wasn't 100% happy with my decision, it was something that I felt like it was in my best interest.
Is the Canadian Football League a league where you can make a living and be financially set for a little while by playing in that league for a few years?
Yeah, I mean, as long as you're smart with your money. I mean, I was making minimum my first year, and that was more than enough for me to be able to make a living on, like, during the season and during the off season. So once you start to make yourself a bit of a more marquee player there, you could start to obviously make more money. And it's, like I said, for me, it's more than enough money that I would be able to work with in terms of comparing it to, I guess, an average salary of an average person in the United States or just in general. So, yeah, I think it's more than enough.
Now, being a professional athlete, there is a shelf span to the time in which you can partake in that profession. How long do you think that you'll be playing professional football for, and what are your plans moving forward after your football playing days are over?
Well, at this point, I haven't really decided how long I want to play for. I think it's something where it'll depend on how my body feels and just kind of where I'm at in life and I guess my family situation, things like that. So I would say right now I'd probably play until my early 30s, and then what happens after that I think would be solely dependent on the types of relationships and experiences that I've had in the time that I was playing. So, in the city of Winnipeg, I feel like I've built a really good rapport with those individuals in that community and people that are in business positions. So, I find that it might be an opportunity for me to stay there after I stop playing, or, I have an education at Northeastern. I'd pretty much be able to capitalize off of that, but I haven't really decided yet.
He's going to be a big hockey fan. He's going to live in Canada for the rest of his life. He's going to change his entire outlook on life, Mike.
See if he starts speaking different now.
Speaking different.
I did go to my first hockey game. It was a Winnipeg Jet game.
Did you enjoy yourself?
I did enjoy myself. It was a little different from football. I found that the fighting gets people really excited, and
Yeah, people don't even like hockey. They just like the fighting. If you take the scoring and penalties out of hockey and just have the fighting, it might be more popular.
I think it might be. I mean, that fight the other night that I think it was Calgary and some other team had where there was 4 fights on the ice at the same time. I felt like that was probably the most entertaining hockey game of the year, just because it was fighting for about 6 or 7 minutes, and there's, guys throwing punches everywhere, and the penalty box is overflowing, and things like that. But I found it to be pretty enjoyable.
I'm an absolute bandwagon hockey fan. I watch during the playoffs and when the Bruins are involved. Outside of that, I have no idea what's going on. It took so long for me to actually understand what icing was. Because I grew up in Brockton, and I know
Right.
there's a good hockey program in Brockton, but I grew up playing football and basketball mostly. Hockey was just never on my radar.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I can certainly understand how you could become a bandwagon hockey fan, because I know I was a little bit when I first caught on with the Bruins, because that was the year they went to the Stanley Cup, my first year, and that's when I started to watch them a little bit more, because I was being exposed to it more in terms of hockey. So I started to watch, and then I was like, oh, well, I'm from Boston. Maybe I'll start watching them, and it kind of took off from there.
Let's talk about your ties to Brockton a little bit. Still keep in touch with a lot of your teammates from your Brockton High days and your coaches?
Yeah, I actually go back to Brockton High a fairly good amount to go see the coaches, and some of my former teammates, Arthur Diaz and Sam Basong, are out there, and some of the other guys like Richard Johnson I'll see on occasion, but for the most part I'll keep in touch with whoever I can. And it's kind of hard as you get older, because guys move around, and they're all doing their own thing, so it's been good for the guys that I can keep in touch with.
Is there anyone from that team that you remember thinking had a shot at the NFL when you played with them during your years at Brockton High, that you think maybe if they really made a go for it, could make their mark in professional football, could at least have a cup of coffee?
I think a lot of those guys could have. I felt like
Richard Johnson was one of the best athletes that I'd ever been around.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely stands out in my mind, and I find that
We could run a 100-yard dash. He would beat me by about 15 yards, and I'm not joking.
I think it'd be at least 15 yards.
Yeah, 20, 25.
Possibility, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think the majority of those guys that I played with my senior year could have actually had a shot, definitely playing Division I football. And for what it is, I think a lot of it has to do with coming from Brockton and having limited opportunities, because, like I said, I spent a lot of time in Florida and seeing those guys. And I can't remember the name of the school. American Heritage High School actually is the name of the school, and they had like 30 offers for different kids to go to Division I schools. And I was thinking to myself, well, if only we had this kind of exposure, we would have been just fine too. So I think a lot of those guys that I played with, whether it be Kari or Arthur, or, Sam Basong in particular, would have had better opportunities. They would have been fine.
What can be done differently to ensure that future student athletes at Brockton High have opportunities like those kids in Florida have?
I think there are a lot of fundamental issues with what's in place now. I think there needs to be a much greater focus on making sure these kids understand that they have to go to class, that they have to perform in the classroom, because you're finding a lot of kids who have talent and they don't have the grades to match, and they don't understand the correlation between the two. And lots of times that's where you find athletes just kind of fall between the rocks in a way and just disappears, because they just never had the grades or the attitude towards school to be successful. And unfortunately, that's happening a lot more here in places like this, as opposed to, schools in Florida where, for lack of a better way of saying it, they can get away with it a little bit more because they have that much exposure. And, even with all the things that they have in place with standards that you have to get into school, there's always ways around it. And it's just a matter of being that good of a football player to the people that are watching.
You mentioned that you still spend quite a bit of time at Brockton High in and around that football program. What advice do you give kids who are playing in that football program these days?
That they can never work hard enough. I feel like a lot of those kids feel entitled because they play in Brockton and they play in such a prestigious school football wise. And I keep telling them every time I go there that for every day that you're in here, there's somebody else that's in their weight room doing the same thing. And, you have schools like Xaverian and, Everett. I don't know if they're still as good as they used to be, but, those teams were the teams that we competed against. And we worked as hard as anybody could have actually worked. When I was there, we were always in the weight room. We were always on the field working out or whatever it was. And we were truly a team amongst ourselves because we cared about winning as much as we cared about each other. And I don't feel like that's what's going on now. And I feel like it's a bunch of individuals who, play football because they want to, not because they feel the need to. And that's kind of what the issue is.
Well, we've been chatting with Jason Vega here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. Jason, I want to thank you so much for coming in this morning. I really appreciate it. Any final words for our listeners this morning as you're getting the opportunity to talk to the greater Brockton area and the south of Boston area here as a member of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers?
Well, I certainly appreciate all the support that I do receive from people that I get messages from on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, whatever it is. I truly appreciate it. And it goes a long way to, I guess, keeping me grounded and humble that I came from here and I can do a lot for this city and for its kids. And, for the CFL, I hope you guys take the opportunity to watch it. It's a different brand of football, but it's certainly football nonetheless. It'll give you a little bit of something to watch in between the NFL and whatever else you guys are watching. So other than that, I appreciate everything, and it's been good to be here with you guys.
Well, we'll be following along. We wish you best of luck. We'll support you, and thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
That's Jason Vega joining us here on WXBR. We'll step aside for a quick break. Mike Paiva brings us a local news update. Stick with us.